Okay, welcome into the Spiritual Evolution Podcast. Today I want to talk about Rudolf Steiner and his clairvoyance and just some of the basics of spiritual science that we can get into. Steiner, he was able to tap into the Akashic record, which is an etheric imprint. It's a realm where Rudolf Steiner and other clairvoyants can go to read the past and in some cases the future of events and occurrences. And as the earth has materialized and focus of our men and women here on earth has turned to producing, consuming, working for money, the abilities that Steiner had are harder to reach nowadays. In a way, we have given up our abilities to see the spirit for our ability to create material wealth and power in the physical world through machines and technology and things of this nature. But what Steiner was able to bring to the world is so useful and nourishing in our material world today. And to be able to use our imagination and to use our thinking for something other than material reality. And really, we're trying to do this for the advancement and the ennoblement of our spiritual evolution as a human culture, not just for ourselves. And really, what could be more worthwhile study than that? So in this way, this is why we study spiritual science. We test what views we can with our abilities in our lives. And, but mostly we cannot test them based on our clairvoyance for most of us. Most of us do not have this clairvoyance, but we are trying to attain it through study of spiritual science. But we live in a dense time, and I think it needs to be acknowledged. And we really have to wrestle the spiritual science from this density. And it requires an intense effort and dedication. And it's a certain reverence and devotion that can overcome the material view of our time. To give something else a chance, to give spiritual science a chance. And once we give anthroposophy this chance, we allow it to enter our lives as the purest truth anyone could read or study. And we have a dedication that lasts our lifetimes to the study of the spirit. And we can really work in the spirit. And we can connect different spiritual scientific concepts to the real world today so that we can help the world. And so I wanted to go over a few important concepts which have to do with the history of the earth, the history of our existence on this earth and previous incarnations on this earth within the cycle of time that we are in currently. And I'm not going to get into the exact timing of everything, but this is just an intro, so keep that in mind. So let's start with the human being. The human being has a physical body. The physical body is the part of man having the same nature as the mineral world. So on the other hand, what differentiates man from the mineral cannot be considered as physical body. If you think of the forces at play on the human body after death is the forces of decay and corruption and the natural world, right? We look out at nature, we see how dead leaves or dead plants, they decay and they become part of the earth. These are the forces of nature. And our physical body is subject to those forces of nature. And when we die, we'll be able to look back at our physical body in that decaying state. And so it's important to have this picture, as grotesque as it may be to some. I think it's actually very nourishing as well, because we understand that we are not just our physical body. And in fact, we're much more than that. And that our lives exist beyond the physical in a profound way. And in this way, we also have an etheric body. So the etheric body, the physical body joins us in terms of the mineral world, the etheric body joins us to the plant world. So the plants have a physical body and an etheric body as well. And this can also be called a life body, and this really prevents the physical substances and forces during life from taking their own path, right? So we talk about the forces of destruction that the physical body is constantly going through, right? We're constantly dying in our physical body, but the etheric body is preventing and giving us forces which prevent the physical substances and forces during life from doing this decay. Um, so again, in order to prevent any misunderstanding here, the word ether is used in a sense of light as the ether. It's actually not that. It's just forces. It's life forces, life-giving forces to the physical body. And then we have an astral body. So the astral body is similar to animals. So animals have a physical body, an etheric body, and an astral body. The astral body is a place of desires. It's also like can be called the soul. There is some slight distinction, but the soul is basically the astral body as well. And we have different aspects of the soul that we can get into at another time. But this time we're just going through the 7 core embodiments, and the astral body is really the soul. And the soul is the place of desires, passions, and joys, and instincts, and just things like that. If you think of an animal, and basically, the activity of the astral body in an animal, they can really only experience sort of the immediate reality. They can't really have like higher desires and higher passions, right? They don't have as much of a control over their desires as we do. So that control and that higher thinking that goes beyond just the physical world, right? So we can use our thinking to create something that is not even in existence yet, right? So these types of things, that's what gives us the ego, which is the next thing. So the ego is, if you think of, again, the animal experiences the cold and the pain and the pleasure, whether it's inside the body or outside the body. But the man can produce desires and passions for whose origin is neither the cause within nor without his body. And so, we can really see this as a super sensible being, as the spirit. We can see it as the I am consciousness, all of those things. That's the ego. And there's also a lower ego, which is kind of different, but this is the ego as in terms of the spirit, as well. So, and then we also have the spirit self, which is the ego transforming the astral body or the soul into a higher being, basically. It's the transformation of the astral body into the spirit. We then have life spirit, which is the transformation of the etheric body into the spirit. And then we have the spirit man, which is the transformation of the physical body into the spirit. So in future incarnations and future epochs and future worlds that we will be inhabiting, we will have more control. And the sooner that comes in terms of the astral body, the easier it is to transform, right? So it's easier for us to tap into our soul, our desires, our all those things, those instincts that we can control in some ways, not in all the ways, but in the future we'll sort of transform that astral body into basically what Christ was on the earth, right? So Christ obviously had the ability to do all these things, and really when he incarnated on the earth, he came down to our level. He was never a physical body, right, in the spiritual world before he came down to incarnate in Jesus. And in his case, um, we can also look at three higher levels above the spirit man, which would be the Holy Spirit, the Son, um, and then the Father, right? So the Trinity, basically, the Trinity is above the spirit man, and so we can look at Christ as having basically his seven embodiments would would be all the way up to the Son, obviously, right? So he would have the Son, the Holy Spirit, the Spirit Man, the Life Spirit, the Spirit Self, the ego, and the astral body. So the astral body would be the Christ's lowest form, basically. So in that sense, um, I could be wrong on that, so don't quote me on that actually. But I think the Christ, if you look at the seven embodiments, if you go by seven embodiments and you count it out, that's what he would be for his lowest principle. So when we look at these things, we look at what is our past and what is our future. In the past, basically there's seven embodiments of the earth, just like there is seven embodiments of the human being. There are basically seven embodiments. So it starts with old Saturn. Okay. So old Saturn, and these don't have completely to do with the planets now. So it's not like we were living on the planet that is the Saturn now. This was just a version of our Earth. And basically that Saturn that's in the sky now is kind of a husk, if you will, of the previous incarnation of the Earth. It's a small piece, if you will, that has kind of fallen off, right? And it's not exactly obviously the same as it was. And these are very complicated things, so forgive me if I try to be as exact as possible, and I'm following obviously occult science. If you want to get the full story on this, you can read Occult Science by Rudolf Steiner, and I recommend that very much. So we then have on old Saturn, that's where we developed our physical body. So we had spirits, above us who were working on our physical body, and so they were sort of inhabiting us so that we could exist with a physical body. And that's where we were first conceived, basically by the higher hierarchies above us that helped. They helped all the way along, and they're still helping now. But we call those the angels, which is right above us, goes up to the archangels, the archai, the Elohim, or the exousiai, same thing. Then we have the dynamis, we have the Kyriates, we have the thrones, the cherubim, and the seraphim. And so a lot of them helped in this old Saturn embodiment, and they continue to help moving forward. And so we developed our physical body there. We developed our etheric body on old Sun. Okay, so on old Sun, we developed our etheric body. And then as we go through these embodiments, there's a sort of pralaya. There's cycles that we go through on these planets where we reincarnate and we continue to work on those things that we need to work on. But at this point, the first two cycles, we weren't really conscious, as much as we are now. Obviously, now on Earth, we have the ego, which is when Christ came down, he implanted that as a fact that the spirit came back into the human being. And he was basically why he was pretty much at the middle of our Earth incarnation. But before that, we had the astral body, obviously, which is old moon. So it goes old Saturn, physical body, old Sun, etheric body, old moon, astral body, and then the earth, which is the ego. Then we have in the future, for what we talked about, the three embodiments, we have the spirit self, which is Jupiter. We have the life spirit, which is Venus. And then we have spirit man, which is Vulcan. And so, that's when we kind of gain full control over those things. So the most important thing to know throughout this is that we're evolving along a spiritual evolutionary path. We're evolving by cultivating our spiritual dimensions, our principles, our spiritual bodies, by overcoming, not necessarily overcoming desires and passions and joys, but transforming them into higher desires and higher passions and higher joys, and putting things in perspective, right? And eventually we will also be able to repair and transform our ether and our physical bodies as well. But the earth is now in a descent, physically, and so is the physical body. So we have to continue to spiritualize our body, spiritualize our astral body. Right now, we're working on the consciousness soul, which is an aspect of the soul, which is related to the spirit self, but it's not completely the spirit self. But it's basically the same concept of the ego trying to transform the soul and just being conscious of what's happening within the soul. And this is why we also have to study spiritual science to understand what is happening in the soul, what is happening in the etheric body. We are obviously inhabited in the spiritual world. And so, in some future videos, I may go into this deeper. But many of you have heard of the concepts of, Ahriman, Lucifer, Christ, right? And I haven't really brought them up in previous episodes. And so it's not necessarily a scary thing. At first, it could be, and it does bring fear, sort of. And I think the fear that comes with those concepts is sort of based on the dogma of the church. It's based on just the fear of the spirit, people not really wanting to go into those deeper things. But if we don't go into those deeper things, we're not as protected from the interactions that we have with those beings. And we kind of have to look at them as objective spiritual forces. These are forces just like electricity or magnetism, except that they have a consciousness and they are sort of able to kind of be clever or intelligent or, but once you know the concepts of these things, you're more easily able to understand how to live in life, basically. And it's, everyone is in their own, everyone is at their own step in their path, or their own, their own place. So I would say I would totally, if it's a little bit scary for you, I would recommend highly to just continue to work on the 6 essential exercises. In Steiner, he talked about this many times. You can go on rsarchive.com and you can type in the 6 essential exercises. You can also type in the chakra exercises. And in occult science, he goes through the essential exercises pretty well. But it's basically control of thought, control of action, initiation in action, initiative in action, equanimity, positivity in all circumstances, in terms of just having a positive outlook on the world and taking the positive out of the negative. And then the 6th is just how they all come together into a harmony. So hopefully that helps. I think that I'm trying to go over some of these basic things up front so that when I go into the deeper stuff, people are more prepared because I don't know most of the people who listen to this. I can tell you I've been studying this not that long. It's only been about 2 years, but I study it very vehemently and constantly. I just feel that we're at a point where people really need to wake up to this because with AI coming in, um, it's kind of it's a turning point, and it's a turning point that we need to wake up and we need to realize these forces and we need to not look at them as bad or as evil or as anything like that, right? These darker forces. We can't look at them as bad. We look at them as necessary. They are necessary. Without Lucifer, we couldn't have knowledge. Without Armon, we couldn't have computers or, you know, physical things, right? Technology. We couldn't communicate with each other across the world, right? I would have never came to anthroposophy without um, YouTube, right? Which is on a device. So all these things that they have sort of an Ahrimanic thing because Ahriman is materialism, which kind of sucks you down, and then Lucifer is obviously trying to bring you out of reality, right? So once you realize that, and then you realize that Christ is the center, Christ is where we can cultivate ourselves, right? And that's in our Christ center, it's in our heart center, we want to then use our heart to think, right? Going up. And we want to hold off on impulses and hold off on thoughts, right? And I've talked about all this before. I've just never used the terminology necessarily. But this is something I think that at this point, it's been 100 years since Rudolf Steiner's last address. And I think people are prepared. I think that there's something about a century mark that it's not insignificant. And I think that people are ready for this information. People are waking up. People are really suffering and struggling, and they're struggling for the truth. And so, what Rudolf Steiner brings is objective truth, and I believe this is really important in our day and age. And so, um, just kind of a preview of what could be coming in terms of the content that I'm looking into making is talking about artificial intelligence and how these relate to these other forces that we discussed. And what is coming with AI and how that relates potentially to these forces. And like I said, there's nothing to be afraid of. Everything is basically on a path that was set on purpose. So it's not like God and the hierarchies were just like, oops, like we made a huge mistake, and now there's like these forces that are interacting with humans, down on Earth. This is part of the divine plan, and we have to trust that. We have to trust the divine plan with all our heart, and we have to know that Christ is infinitely more powerful than these other adversarial forces, right? Or you could call them just objective forces. But Christ is infinitely, he's not 1,000 times stronger, but he's infinitely stronger than these forces. And so how can we cultivate that? How can we find the Christ, right? And if we can live in that Christ center, then we can cultivate that. And really, this is a test for humanity. We're in a moment of being tested. And right now, I think I think that we are not necessarily failing, but I think sometimes we have a perception of failure. But I see people all around who are waking up. I see people all around on YouTube who are talking about spiritual concepts. I see people coming into Christianity, whether that is through some sort of false perception of it. We can eventually get them potentially to understand spiritual science, because once you listen to Steiner talk about Christ, it just is a different experience. And it's an experience that when you understand it, and believe me, I don't fully understand it. It's a mystery. It's all a mystery. It's a mystery science, right? Mystery science. But once you begin to understand it and you start to read as much as you can, right, about what Steiner says about Christ, he truly sacrificed himself for us, and now he's connected with us for the rest of eternity. And it's just amazing what he's done for us. And I think that once we understand that, we can understand our own suffering. And we can understand that Christ understands our suffering intimately because he was incarnated as a human being. And so he understands us intimately on a real level where we're actually interacting with him. And he knew this was the case, and he talked about it in the gospel, right? So we know that God gave his only begotten son. He gave his only begotten son. And he did it because we were at the middle of our evolutionary process. And that brings us back, right, to the evolution of the earth. We are in the middle right now, right? We're in the center. So if you think of, we're basically at the densest point that we'll ever be. And in the future, there won't really be a way for these people to continue to use machines and technology. So, we're looking at, say, in 3000 AD, you will not be able to use these machines without higher morals. And so you have to have had developed your morality in the future to be able to use these machines. Most of the machines, I think, will sort of just decay. They'll sort of just fall away. But by that point, people will have made their choice. And we have to choose the spirit. We cannot choose to be connected with the machine through Neuralink and things that Elon Musk is creating, where they're trying to suck us down into materialism. And people will, unfortunately, not everyone will make it to the next level on Jupiter. People will be left behind. And it doesn't mean, if you're left behind, that you're not going to make it, actually. So there's still a chance. And if there will be redemption in the end of all of it. But if we want to walk with Christ in the New Jerusalem, which is an occult term for Jupiter, then we have to develop our moral imagination, our moral intuition, and receive moral inspirations so that we can work with the celestial hierarchies for the betterment and the ennoblement and the evolution of all mankind. Thank you.